welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about the 2024 Value Electronics King of TVs Shootout. So I have the scorecard here that we will go over, but most of this is just going to be our own opinions and thoughts about how each one performed, as well as any extra input anyone here has. So we have Jason Dustle from AV Pro, and he didn't have as much time to view the displays as the rest of us, as he was focused on getting the content on the displays. We have John Reformato, one of the judges, and then David McKenzie and Mike Osachu were also judges. So we'll start with Jason, if you want to cover anything that you saw. I know, again, you didn't get to see the displays too much, but...
Yeah. Thanks, Diesel. Thanks for having me. I've been part of the Shootout now for like 6 or 7 years, and just like you and Dwayne did this year, and John and I in the past, we have gone and calibrated them, and I know it takes a lot of time and effort. So, thank you guys for donating your time and doing all that work. I know how much work it is. My job is to make sure that the system's running, and as Cecil said, all the content's on the screen. So yeah, I'm behind the scenes a little bit. I don't get to step out and see the TVs all that much, but I did a little bit, which was really fun. And having those reference monitors there is always really cool. I wasn't too surprised at how I wasn't too surprised at the results of the Shootout. I think all the TVs looked really good. There was a few times where the A95L and the Samsung were just so stinking close to each other. I don't even know how I would have scored them myself. So I'm not surprised at all that they came in with what, 1/10 of a point, right, between the two.
It was actually had to be rounded because it was 0.06.
Yeah, I mean, not a surprise at all. And what I do have to say is I really give props to Samsung. They've really stepped it up, man. Last year they did really well. This year they've done really well. They've been sending people to the Shootout. We've seen some Samsung folks come into the ISF classes in the last couple of years. So I really want to give my shout out to those guys for really stepping it up and making a really big splash last year and this year. But other than that, the second day of doing the best out of the box modes, I thought was really interesting. We hadn't really done that in the past, and I think we all kind of agreed on this, that as long as the end user takes the TV out of the box and does 10 minutes worth of work with it, they can get it pretty darn close. And squeezing out that last 20 to 25% usually the hardest and the most expensive part. But just seeing all of them in the same room together and all of them next to the reference monitor and all their out of the box modes, some were much closer, some were a little bit further away than I thought they would be. So it was really nice to see them all in the same room. But other than that, everything ran really smoothly. It was interesting having it in Robert's shop versus in the fancy place that we normally do it in. To me, it felt a little more like homegrown. So I had a great time, and thank you guys for all your hard work. Other than that, that's all I got.
Thank you for your hard work, because you made it go seamless between test patterns as well as video content.
It is a lot, and I appreciate you saying that. But I will say that this year we took a few steps to make it run even smoother. I've got pictures of years past of my little workstation behind the scenes, and there's like 4 different Blu-ray players, discs everywhere, handwritten notes of which chapters, and you had to play like a DJ. Like one disc was queuing up while the other disc was playing, and you had to get through all the the intro stuff and get to the splash screen with the picking the right chapters, and it was always like so stressful.
No broken monitors this time.
Yeah, a couple of years ago I accidentally kicked my confidence monitor behind the behind the scenes there, so that was always that was
Let's
really
be
fun
clear,
to deal
that
with.
was a cheap consumer TV, not a monitor. So.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, thank you. It was like I think it was like $199 little 32-inch special, but thanks to you guys too for helping my life a lot, helping it go a lot easier for me.
All right, so I do have one question that I'm gonna have everybody answer. Since this event really has been helping the TV manufacturers make improvements year to year, so I know before the actual event Friday night, especially, we were going through some content. Was there anything in particular that you saw that you would want to give direction to the manufacturers to still improve on going forward?
The one thing that I noticed that I thought was a little odd was I don't remember, we were looking at the Spears disc, and I believe it was a dark red chrominance test pattern. And
dynamic range low red.
I remember that. Yeah.
that one, yeah. And one of the TVs, there was just like almost. I mean, I thought something was wrong for a second. There was like almost no red in it. But other than that, I don't really remember seeing anything that stood out too crazy. Other than that one instance.
I can tell you, in my viewpoint, I was a little surprised how the G4 wasn't coming out of black the way I thought it should come out of black. It just was having trouble in some of the content. And I'm a little surprised. I've seen other LGs like the C2 and other past units that working perfectly. That was one thing. And then the other thing that I wanted to comment on was the Samsung, although the anti-glare coating has a lot of uses for different, people for different use cases, depending how bright their room is. Even in dark, we were having challenges with this. Even in dark room, with a little bit of light going on, like Friday night when we were evaluating some of the sets, depending on how the light's hitting the screen, it can cause a slight shift in red on that set, depending how the light is hitting it. If it's behind it, it's fine, but if it's the right way. So those are two things that kind of stuck out to me.
When you say shift in red, the whole screen takes on a bit of a red cast, right?
Very slight. Yeah, it's very, very subtle, but just depends on the way the light is hitting the screen, even in a dark room. Bright.
Did you guys,
Did
you guys like the matte finish? I thought it was kind of cool. Like it looked.
I did too.
My
it'll probably have some people who really like it and others who really hate it.
yeah, my laptop here, it has an OLED screen with a matte finish, and it was a little weird at first, but I quite like it now.
Yeah, I think it serves a great purpose.
If you have a perfectly dark room, no lights at all, it's great. If you have super bright room, it's great. It's just sometimes in between, as I said, depending on the way the light was shifted.
Yeah, it really depends on how the light hits the screen. So like if you my living room, I have two like lights to the side or slightly behind, something like that's going to be fine with that, because then you don't see the reflection of yourself in the display. The problem is if you have a window facing the screen, you're basically looking at what looks like an IPS LCD, depending on how bright it is outside. But at nighttime, then it turns back into an OLED, so it serves dual purpose, I guess. So it just really depends on the room. So yeah, Friday night there was some little lights around the room while we were still working, setting things up, that you could just see where it was causing some kind of color shift, and you could see the borders raising the black level compared to the other displays. So that kind of situation, you do start to see some of its issues. But when it's completely dark, then it's okay. That's not really much of an issue there.
To play devil's advocate here, we're talking about that like it's as an issue, but don't glossy coated screens have issues?
Yeah, I always say this: no TV are you going to be able to sit down and watch a horror movie during the daytime and enjoy the experience.
Right.
Like it's just not going to happen. So do you want your general viewing to be where you see a reflection of like yourself or the light source or something in a small confined space, or do you want it spread across the screen, reducing the contrast? And that is 100% someone's preference. There was someone there saying that if he got that TV and he brought it home and saw that screen, he would immediately take it back. He hated it. Other people, they walked by and said, oh, this is beautiful. Like, so it's really one person to the next if they like it or not.
The only other thing I wanted to bring up was that what was quite evident, I think Mike, you mentioned this too, is when we started playing the 4000 nit content, the BT 2020 stuff, you definitely could see how the LG was falling down a little bit. It just didn't have the same color volume as the rest of the set, the OLEDs. So, but that's something I know they're working on, right? But it's a physical, technical limitation of the panel, right? But they have been improving it, and I know they're still working on it. But that was the only other thing that was very visible to me.
Okay, yeah. So with the LG, for years you've been able to upload your own custom tone curve for the tone mapping, and you can alter that. This year they added in the user menu where you at least get a 10-point scale of how you want to adjust it. But the way that we calibrated it was to try and find a balance of it being able to maintain brightness with very small amount of clipping. So only in the absolute brightest, like a certain particular scene that we used where pretty much most of the screen was over 3000 nits. That's where you actually really saw, the clipping and a little bit of the the image starting to become a little more washed out. But those edge cases are the only times where I would say that the LGs are looking, what people would say is washed out. And then again, if we were to change the tone mapping specifically for that kind of scene, which is very rare, then we could have darkened it so that it would show the detail and it wouldn't have that look to it. So it was kind of a balance there. Whereas on the Sony with Gradation Preferred, like it's always doing what Sony feels the tone mapping should do, which they try to lean a little bit more towards brightness than what I would say Samsung does. Samsung's tone mapping is more aggressive at 4,000 nits. But the S95D technically is a more capable panel that's brighter. So for me, from what I saw, the S95D and the A95L were basically equal in brightness, with the S95D showing a hair more detail for me. And then the G4 was the brightest of the three in that particular case, but with a more reduction in the detail because of the way that we set the tone mapping for that scene.
What did you think of the motion? I thought, the reason why I bring it up is I know the Sony was definitely superior in my mind, but LG did pretty well. I was looking at the motion on the LG and I was like, wow, it's pretty good.
And just to be clear, the motion tests we did were with 24 FPS film, or that's what we're talking about here, right? We're not talking about the motion resolution of the panel so much.
Correct.
Right.
It's whatever Sony is doing, and it looks like LG are doing something similar now. I like it. I almost don't want to talk too much about it because I don't fully know what they're doing. But they're driving the panel in some way. I don't think it's. I've heard before like there's some Sony settings that add just a tiny bit of motion interpolation, and I'm really confident we're not seeing that, because with that kind of you'd see shredding around objects or like little hiccups, and I didn't see any of that. But it was outputting 24 frames per second film that avoids the sort of strobing effect you sometimes see on OLEDs. More research is needed, but thumbs up for now.
Hey, what did you think of the telecinic shutter?
Fortunately, we're not using telecines anymore in film transfer. So. No,
right, so
none of the displays had any kind of added 3.2 pull down, like any 24 frames per second is always being output.
Yeah, everything that was set up for 20 or 23.9. So the way that these categories, for the people who are watching this, these were like the overarching main categories, and then below here would have been multiple attributes per category that were judged on. So motion, film motion, we'll call it, was in this HDR general. So if you notice, this is one of the areas where the LG was ahead of the Samsung. So it's possible that that's where the judges docked the Samsung some. However, personally, I would say, I've been talking about Samsung having a motion issue with intermittent frame skips or drops the last few years. And while they had improved it this year when the TV launched, it was still there. However, from all the content that I saw that weekend, it seems fixed. So it seems like I didn't see a single drop frame anywhere. So I do want to, applaud Samsung for making huge strides. And I think overall, I think most of you would agree that if we were to go, if there was an extra category for most improved over last year, then Samsung would have won that category. Like
if there was a most improved, I would absolutely agree.
Yeah.
I have a question for Mike.
Yeah. Hi.
How was your first experience judging at the Shootout?
I absolutely loved it. So thanks for having me at it. It was great seeing everybody in person, versus chatting over everybody online, and seeing the sequence of the events, and being able to actually put my knowledge for everybody who's watching this event into action. It was great, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to doing it again. And
was it like, was it, did you feel like it was easier or harder? I'm just curious, like what kind of preconceived idea you had in your head. So like when you actually did get all those TVs next to the reference monitor, do you think it was easier or harder to tell the differences? What were you expecting versus what actually happened?
I think it was definitely a lot of energy put into it. So, you know, it was a very tiring event. So looking at, because, you know, you're putting every single television set under the microscope relative to the reference displays. So, you know, when we're looking between, you know, 6 monitors, well, actually 8 monitors if you included 2 references, there's a lot of movement in the room and a lot of double checking, triple checking, and making sure that we're comparing the display in question to the reference monitor and not the displays to one another. So just sort of keeping that in line in our minds and saying, well, where's one panel coming ahead? Where is it? Where are the areas for improvement? So I, in my mind, I don't know really if I had like a general vision of what I was to expect when I got there. All I know is when I got there and actually started getting to work, I thought, all right, now it's time for work. This is not a walk in the park. I'm working at this.
I think a lot of people think that the judges just come in and, you know, look at the monitor and look at the TV and go, okay, boom, I give it a score. And that's not the case. I mean, there's times where we look at scenes for like a long time. There was one particular scene, I don't remember which one, maybe you guys will remember, but you know, we want to give everybody enough time to look at what they want to look at, and then it's kind of like, okay, well, is everybody ready to move on to the next scene? And it was a dark one, and I don't remember. It may have been the one with the statue. And I think that was in the basement.
Yes, I think, or something.
Yeah. So it was like we'd been looking at that one scene for like 10 minutes on an A/B loop, and I was like, okay, you guys ready to move on to the next scene? And there was still one judge that was like, no, still looking. So yeah, I mean, you're in this dark room, you're looking at all these TVs, you're getting close to them, you're getting further away from them. Like, you know, it's a long day, and it definitely puts a lot of, you know, stress on your eyes and your brain, and it is a lot of work.
It's just what Jason said. It's you know, I think many times, you know, it felt like sometimes we just didn't have enough time. Well, we did, but didn't have enough time to like just look at everything in the depth that we wanted to. But even though we did, it's just the time took. We wanted to make sure that we took our time and came up with the most accurate result. So rather than just moving on to the next scene, just for the viewers who are wondering how that was happening, us judges were asking, no, let's keep it paused for a bit longer because we know how the results on this matter, and it's not something that we can just move through quickly. And it's no, I mean, these events take a long time. They go beyond the time when we expect, and that's just how it is. But if we're going to get the most accurate response for manufacturers, if we're going to do the best for those viewers who are watching and relying on this TV shootout in order to make a choice on the TV set that they want, everybody needs to know that we are taking our time with this.
Yeah,
that's actually I'd like to touch on that because the first shootout I came to was 2012, and I was involved in home entertainment mastering a little bit at that time, but most of what I was doing was reviewing displays for HD TV test. So although my roles changed over the years, now I'm full-time into compression, authoring, and color and stuff. The shootouts remain constant, and the reason for that is that beyond the fact that I have a personal huge interest in display technology, it's vitally important to what I do and what everyone working in this industry does, that people have a means of watching this stuff accurately at home. Like, I would hate, it would not be fun at all if I was doing all this work and the only person who could see it correctly would be, a couple of colorists around the world looking at a broadcast monitor. So yeah, no, it's essential that consumer TVs stick to the standards and do their job, and they mostly are now. Thanks in part.
They're doing a great job. Yeah.
But the other thing I want to add too, which maybe some of the viewers might be interested in, there's a couple of things that are different in this shootout than all previous other shootouts. First of all, because we didn't stream anything live, we're able to use any content, for this personal event that we wanted to. So Cecil spent, Classy Tech spent a huge amount of time,
For those wondering why I haven't done videos in a few months, this is mostly why.
It's a huge amount of time procuring, all the different content that, we're all aware of as far as to show deficiencies in the sets and pros and cons and everything else. There's a huge amount of content. And then secondly, the scorecard, you only saw the accumulated results, right? There obviously, everybody had a sheet for each category. We had a separate sheet on a clipboard with, I don't know how many different categories we had to vote on, but after a while I was getting tired, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it was a lot of work. So we had a lot of subcategories to try and be able to judge the smaller, we had much greater granularity in what we were looking at and judging, and put it that way.
Yeah, so when I was designing the scorecard last year, the prior events like the scorecards, it was time for a change. We all agreed on that. So we made a pretty significant change, but we kind of kept a lot of it in line with what it was before. And it was like the first step into what this was. And the whole point of going as in-depth was to have as many data points as possible for the most fine average at the end. And there was well over 1,000 data points that had to be entered. And I think the end result is where each TV really, like for me, as I look over everything, they all land where I would expect them to. Like, I think it all worked out well. And so since 3 of you guys were judges, let me know for future events. Like, did you like having this much to judge on? Do you want it scaled back? John, you've been there for years, and David, you've been judging for quite a while. So there's always more feedback to change for next year. And then also, Jason, I know you have to leave soon. If you have any last things you want to say, and if you could also just briefly talk on the LCDs, because as much as everybody loves the OLEDs, the LCDs were there and need some attention as well.
I feel my entire life as an enthusiast of this industry and consumer electronics in general. I grew up with my grandparents had a CRT projector and CRT rear projection TVs, and then into CRT monitors. And so I've never actually lived with LCD, because I've gone straight from OLED to plasma. I'm sorry, from CRT to plasma. I did have DLP for a little while, which I'm sure we all remember those, but it's really hard for me to it's hard for me to get over the fact that if I move my head a little bit this way, or if I sit one seat over, that the picture looks different. Or if I go a little higher or a little lower, the picture looks a little different.
And that's only sorry to interrupt you, but that's only a bigger and bigger problem as the screens get bigger. Because
I know
you sit, part of the screen will be right, and the sides won't be.
It's crazy. I'm part of I work on these CDO working groups where we write recommended practice papers for integrators all over the world. And right now we're working on an update from the 2017 home theater design paper, and it's immersive video design. And we're recommending to people when they're designing rooms for people, we're talking these days especially with high res stuff. And Phil Holland was there to show us this a couple years ago with how close you can sit to 8K and still not see pixels. I mean, it's crazy. You can get an 80-degree viewing angle and still be okay. So, we're doing all these things to get the picture to be more immersive for people. I mean, I've done theaters lately. I don't know if Mike or if you guys have seen these, but I've done a couple theaters lately where the screen in the room is wall to wall, floor to ceiling. So it's we want to get these massive viewing angles. We want to sit really close, and the color shifts. Like to David's point, you look in the upper left corner and it's a different color than compared to what's in the middle of the screen. So that's just one thing that is really hard for me to let go with LCD. And it's not to pick on them. It's just the technology and one of the limitations to it. But I got to say, man, a lot of them, the motion looked pretty good. The overall color volume wasn't bad. Some of the bright scenes, you could definitely see a little bit more detail. And I know there have been a lot of improvements to them lately, and I definitely think that they've gotten a lot better. But the overall look, it's just really hard for me when you have the OLEDs all on one side and the LCDs on another side. Your eyes just keep getting attracted to over there. Especially when we were on the OLED side and I would look to the right, at an extreme angle at the LCDs, the viewing angle issue is just stuck out like a sore thumb. But as soon as you were dead center with them, man, most of them looked pretty good. I was pretty happy with most of them. The one that won wasn't a big surprise. I was really excited to see that one because I haven't seen it yet before. But it seems like they've got a pretty good control over the local dimming zones and whatnot. What did the mini LED won by? It was only another tenth of a point or something.
It was another one that had to be rounded. Yeah, it was point
that's
zero.
What I mean. I mean, they're all so good at this point. It's really crazy to It's not like one was terrible. All three of them were pretty darn good. And I think the LG held its own pretty well considering it was half the price of the others. I thought that was kind of interesting. But,
on the note of price, I have to ask that because when we're judging these things, I'm actually not aware of what these things cost. Like we're kind of doing it without any reference to price. How much cheaper are the LCD TVs? You know, it's like say the Sony LCD versus the Sony OLED. How much cheaper is the LCD?
They're in the same ballpark-ish, but what I can definitely tell you is the Sony LCD and the Samsung LCD, those are in the $300 to $3,400 range, but the LG was like it's like an $1,800 TV on the LCD side at least.
Yeah, I think the LG's biggest thing that stood out was the viewing angle, and it was the worst.
It was pretty rough.
And I just want to add in, I just about LCDs in general, and for viewers that are watching this who own LCD TVs, it's really interesting if you look at like the last 2 decades of televisions. You know, like when we came out of the CRT era, just as Jason was mentioning, you know, LCDs and plasmas, you know, they started entering the market, right? And LCDs have persevered over the years. Like they continue to
they've gotten better.
They evolve in their own sort of way. You know, we've seen a variety of different lights that they were using, you know, as a backlights, and now we got local dimming, and you know, we're expanding the color, and now Samsung has quantum dots. There's a whole pile of different evolutions of LCD. And meanwhile, you know, we got plasma, and many people remember, you know, for we'll say the video files that, you know, want to have a bit more a better black level. Eventually plasma reached the end of its capability in terms of a tech, and then, you know, OLED came out, and now LG, you know, after a decade now, you know, maybe we're hitting the limits of what OLED can do, and now we've got quantum dots just starting off and taking us in a new way of video yet, but all the way through that, LCD has still remained and is now with Sony's new Bravia 9, you know, we got a 3000 nit panel, you know, they definitely excel on brightness. So it provides like still a great alternative to the OLED panels that are out there for people who are looking for that brightest white. And sure, it may not have the same color gamut as a QD OLED, or it may not have the same black level overall, but consumers still have that choice. And that's really what's important for them there, because you know, on a full field white, as we know, neither of the OLED technologies can do anything beyond maybe 300 nits full field, 350. And whereas these LCD panels, you know, 600-700 nits full field, and that's gonna make a very big difference on some of these scenes. Just as we saw there at the shootout, those scenes that demanded a lot of full field or a lot of large screen white levels, the LCDs definitely, you know, excelled in that category.
That dual layer is where it's at. As soon as that price trickles down to more consumer friendly prices, that dual layer I think is really going to be sort of the fork in the road of LCDs really evolving into something that we always wanted them to be.
Do we think that's going to come to consumer?
Well, it
Hisense did it a couple years ago.
Hisense did it. I think it was 21 with the U9DG.
It was really expensive.
The one major issue with that I remember was the pixel response time was incredibly slow. And
it was really heavy and very expensive.
Why would the response? I'm just trying to think from a design standpoint. Is there any reason?
It may have just been like that's the only consumer level one that's been tested, so it may have just been a thing for that particular model. But that's all we have to go off of so far. I just remember that sticking out as one of the issues. Is like even just general TV watching, you would see ghosting on that Hisense, but it could have also again just been the way Hisense was back in 21. So.
Hey, Cecil, just one last thing. You want to comment a little bit about what people are talking about as far as the value of the shootout, being the sets were extremely close, you know, versus pro user versus, you know, general retail customer?
Yep. So Jason.
Thank you guys for having me. Yeah, good to see you guys. Yeah, and we'll I'm sure we'll see you next year. And thank you guys for all your hard work again. Mike, you know, drove 9 hours from Toronto. Dave and I and John flew from Florida. Cecil probably drove from wherever he was and spent an extra week there and got all the content ready. And, you know, I just hope people realize that, you know, this is a huge team effort. It takes a lot of manpower and time and energy to put this event on. And I think we almost have it looking like we know what we're doing. So thank you guys. Thank you guys so much. And again, Cecil, thanks for having me on your show, and bye, friends.
See you guys. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Basically about, like, people were talking about how close the TVs were together.
Okay.
And
so, yeah. Again, afterwards, you know, my comment was that for me, there really wasn't too many surprises. I thought everything, like I said before, scored pretty much in line with what I've been seeing. And this is not the first time that I've seen these displays with the 3110. I've kind of done this evaluation before, and it all kind of lined up with what I was expecting. But I really want to stress, for me, like this goes in line with what I asked earlier. That again, I'll let you guys answer this too, about what's the thing that we need to get the manufacturers to improve. And for me, it's low luminance. I know there's this big marketing push for more brightness, and while that's nice, it's still going to take, even with the 3110 being out there now, for creators, it's going to take a long time before creators really want to start pushing that high luminance, because they are keeping in mind that the average consumer is going to have a $500 to $1,000 TV that can't do that yet.
I also don't think it's so much what the average consumer has, but movies like historically have been projected from film, and now those digital projectors, it's watched in dark rooms. Most film content is not.
Yeah, it's dark. Like shows generally start dark, and then the whole point of HDR is not just those big explosions and high brightness for that, but it is that detail and depth down low. The dark scenes definitely is where we saw the difference the most between the displays.
Yeah, I like to add to that whenever you're ready, Cecil. I'll add to that.
Yeah. So each of them has their own set of problems. A95L still has the posterization, very, very dark, below a nit or around a nit level. The Samsung S95D for me, I felt was the best at near black, personally, and it also won the HDR dark scenes. The G4, so one thing that I've been talking about with WRGs going back to the A90J and stuff, I was taking measurements of saturation at very low stimulus levels, like 10% or whatever, instead of the industry standard that's in the workflow, like on Kalman or whatever, to use 50 or 75. And as you go lower, you see how these saturations change, and on the WRGBs in particular, the gamut shrinks considerably. And with most general content, so let's say you're watching something in SDR with 709 or even HDR, and the grade of the color is still within 709, you're not going to see that problem yet. It's only when the grade goes deep into P3 or beyond P3, deep into 2020, where if you have a display that can do it, like the QD OLEDs right next to the WRGB, and you're showing a scene that's deep into 2020 and it's very dark, and now the LG's shrunk to 709, that's where it's like a night and day difference.
And we saw that. I think we saw that in one of the scenes with the head, right?
No, there was a particular scene that definitely showed that.
That's not a problem though, that I think LG, like, that can't be solved electronically. Like, if anybody here tries to use the CMS controls on an LG OLED, if you take a look at it on, say, a saturation, we'll call it a ramp pattern. So whether it's a saturation ramp of red, green, or blue, using any of those controls will only allow the adjustment on the brighter end. The issue with less saturation at lower luminance levels, and this happens both on high luminance and low luminance with WRGB, is that viewers got to remember that the WRG, it uses a white OLED layer first, right? And then there's a color filter array that's put over top of that white OLED layer. And what ends up happening is the white subpixel, you could say, is always dominating the picture. So when the picture is playing very brightly, that's why we lose our color volume, because that white subpixel is reducing the color volume capable that is filtered on the RGB subpixel level. When the luminance gets lower on a WRGB panel, again, the white subpixel takes over, and there's just not enough luminance coming out of those RGB subpixels. So the white takes over. And of course, anytime you add white with color, you're going to completely desaturate it. You're going to lose your color. And that's nothing that anything in the electronics of the LG can do. It's not like you can overdrive those levels electronically, because then you get stuff like banding happening. And anybody who puts or knows that if you or if you push up the saturation control on an LG within the color CMS controls, you're going to add color artifacts. So in the end, I think that in a QD OLED, that's not the same thing, because the quantum dots don't have color filters over top of them.
But so on Friday, when we were going through some content beforehand, one of the scenes that I wanted to use was a particularly well-known scene for low luminance saturation that a lot of people use that showed issues with QD OLEDs in the past with a particular red robe. However, when we checked that this year, none of the displays had any issues. Like all of them had perfectly fine saturation with that content. So we went ahead and scrapped that from even being judged because there was no point. The main area where we did see and where I was pointing this out to some of you guys on Friday night was like with this particularly green scene that is far like completely into 2020, how the reference monitor and the QD OLEDs could show that green, very vibrantly, even though it was very dark. But on the LG, you almost couldn't see any green at all, or it was like shifting the hue. It was just completely wrong. And that's where, again, at that point, the gamut coverage of the LG has dropped to 709. And so like that particular type of content that's very heavily saturated, very highly graded, I would call it, really shows that difference. But again, if it was content that was graded only going through 709, you really wouldn't see that particular issue. But there's also other, again, situations and scenarios where low luminance color can be a problem, like with the certain scenes where you could see lots of posterization on the A95L and the G4, whereas the Samsung did a really good job of controlling that.
Well, yeah, it's also interesting to know a lot of people were questioning why the LG didn't do better, and just as I said, just what you just talked about, we had content that showed that.
Yeah, we have content that shows strengths and weaknesses of all the displays.
Exactly, but when we saw the content that you were just talking about, again, you look at that, you have a category, you're going to rate it, you're going to judge it a little bit less, right? Because of what you were describing. Also, the other thing too, just to say again, what you were talking about with the red robe and the low luminance, color saturation. Everybody was talking about that for months and months and months, right? They thought there was something wrong with the Sony and this, that, and the other. And as you mentioned, we were scrutinizing it the night before. It all looked perfect. So maybe it's panel variants. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, there definitely is, many of the A95Ks, A95Ls.
Right.
You could see that pretty blatantly. Like you wouldn't even need a reference next to it to know that it wasn't right. But this particular time didn't see anything wrong on it, so that's why, again, that particular scene was cut. There was just no reason to show it.
So the other thing too I want to mention is, we spoke about this, Cecil, is what shocked me the most as a judge this year, not seeing the S95D in person until I got to the store, was how well the Sony kept up with the brightness of the S95D. And that was primarily because of the tone mapping, right? So maybe we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was talking about that earlier, how Samsung has a bit more aggressive roll-off with especially 4,000 nit content than, whereas Sony, like, it just ignores metadata. It's dynamic. It does what Sony wants to do regardless. And so the A95L, even though the panel itself is not as capable, it's leaning towards not reducing the brightness as much in those high APL scenes as the Samsung. The Samsung's going to pull them down more, even though it has more headroom. And the trade result is that they're roughly equal in brightness, very, very similar in brightness in those very high APL, high graded scenes. But I do feel like the Samsung retained a little bit more detail, and the Sony had a hair bit of clipping in certain situations.
Right. Yeah. But it was interesting because, one of the comments I made when I got there was I guess I was expecting the Gen 3 panel on the Samsung to just blow away everybody else, you know what I'm saying? And it didn't. I mean, it was, the other sets held their own. It wasn't, and again, we spoke to Sony, and we're never going to get the answer from them, but because I know on FOMO stream, they were talking to one of the judges, or so they were talking about something, and they claimed that could have been a Gen 3 panel on the Sony, but Sony says no.
Yeah, that's something that, again, something that I feedback for the manufacturers, Samsung in particular. It is fairly new where we have these static and active tone mapping option. I feel like they should take that a step further, whereas active is their dynamic tone mapping. And on the static one, they should have different varying levels. One that has more detail oriented, like it is now, where it's more aggressive, and then maybe like a mid-level step where gives up some of the detail, doesn't tone map as aggressively to get a little bit brighter, and then maybe a third option that either hard clips or very close to a hard clip. Something like that would allow them to. It would be similar to like what LG is doing now, except LG has the 10-point scale, and you can choose the 3 different, whether it's 1,000, 4,000, 10,000. I don't think that much is needed, but a few different options for the tone mapping would be nice to have.
Yeah, for sure.
Classy, I want to still go off some of the comments that you made a little earlier again about what other improvements the manufacturers can make, and let's stick a little bit back on the low end again. A couple things I did mention to both Samsung and Sony while they were there is one, an issue that's been pretty much on all the. Well, actually, it has been on every OLED, including QNED OLED. In the darker parts of the picture, it's the dithering. It's that noise that's in the very bottom end. So if you put up a solid, let's just say a full field pattern below a certain nit level, then it doesn't look uniform anymore. And this is different than panel uniformity. But if you look at the pixels, they all like kind of varying brightness levels, and it kind of looks like film grain, but it's static.
It almost looks like it's crawling on the screen.
Yeah. If you look at it really closely, you can see they fluctuate in luminance, and it is on there on the screen, and that's just something that it would be wonderful to see if either of the technologies is able to eliminate it. I actually don't know what the cause of that would be below a certain nit level. If anybody here knows, feel free to mention it.
I don't know the exact reason, but they're not going to add dithering. They're not going to do that. There's no other reason why they would, right? So it's something the panel's doing. I'm not sure they can change that. Yeah,
inherent in part of the technology, and why I'm not really sure. But I guess, and the other part would be is. Regarding HDR, and Cecil, you said that HDR is not just brightness, but it's also the darker levels, and it's really important for everybody to understand is that if you look at the whole HDR code values from say 64 to 940, half of those code values deal with content from below a nit to 100 nits. So there's a lot of codes that try to smooth the transitions in the darker parts of the picture versus the rest of the code values, which goes from 100 nits up to 10,000 nits. So being able to have a little bit more control calibration wise at the bottom end, because for anybody here who's tried to use 20-point controls, know that a good portion of them is not necessarily usable for part of the range, but to be able to have more fine-tuned controlling of the bottom end of the range. So say, for example, the first step, whether it's step 1 on the Sony or 5% on a Samsung, it would control a range of say like codes 100 all the way to through 240, right? Sometimes you want to be able to reduce those steps or have more fine-tuned controls between each of that range to smoothen out that grayscale and HDR just a little bit more, because some of the controls are just a bit too coarse. You add one click here and now suddenly you're far too green, and the crossover between the second point and the 20 point is too wide, too varied. And it can cause a little bit of an uneven grayscale at times.
I seem to remember hearing, don't all these, the end step of all of the panels is still assuming 2.2 gamma, is that correct? So I'm like, what's like the sort of block diagram of how the video gets processed? If there's multiple conversions going on, that might be why the controls don't exactly align the way you'd hope that they would.
I'm not sure if I was telling the manufacturers that it almost feels like the controls are still designed in an SDR world and they're just being transported to HDR. And
exactly.
and it's like, okay, well, here's the same levels of controls, and we'll block off this amount of, a certain amount of space. And then, but it doesn't optimize. While you can optimize those controls in SDR video, they're less than optimal to use with fine tuning HDR calibrations. But the reality is that we can still calibrate HDR really, really closely, even without all those controls. I'm just talking about from a very picky point of view, where the nth degree is, that's what I want to get to. But it would be nice to have a little bit more control at the bottom end.
That is something that is a benefit of LG, is you can do that with LG. So that would be nice to have on the Sony and Samsung. So like the Samsung in particular, if you were to do the 20 point in the user menu in HDR, what would be the first point that a lot of people would think would correlate with 5%, actually adjusts closer to 25 and below that. So, there's really no granular control for the HDR grayscale and
That's
HDR
right.
in the user menu.
Yeah.
David, what feedback do you have for manufacturers?
One of the few things I'd say that I wouldn't even say it stuck out, but that I could see with the Sony A95L versus the BVM, the gradation near black is just not quite as good, in that what would be rendered as a couple of very velvety smooth steps coming out of black on the BVM was a little more contrasty, a little more of a sudden jump on the Sony QD OLED. Samsung seemed to have a better handle on that now. So I'm sure Sony are aware of that, and whatever the successor to the A95L is, I'm sure it'll improve on that. Regarding the what I was talking about earlier with playback of 24 FPS film, to John's gag about it's not 60 hertz judder. It's this Sony. Remember Sony maybe did this originally, and I think LG now have a very good handle on it. But whatever they're doing to play 24 frames per second content back it's natural and it's smooth, whereas the Samsung QD OLED had a bit more of that strobing effect.
Yeah.
Which that might be why it came that decimal point behind the Sony. That would be my point of improvement. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's it. Like they're really good.
One of the things is, you mentioned something when we're talking about all these things. I was reading some of the comments on social media, or people going, they all know that there's pros and cons to all the sets, right? And you really can't go wrong with any of the sets if you're going to buy it as a general consumer. But the kinds of things we were looking at, things such a granular level, right? And we were finding these little nuances here and there on all the sets, right? And I think that's what made the voting vary from set to set, even though so slightly. Is there are differences. If you really pull back the curtain and look at all the nitty gritty and try and split hairs, you're going to see that there are lots of pros and cons.
And can I just add there, the Sony BVM has artifacts too. None of these things are perfect.
Right.
So this whole conversation kind of brings me back to, when I was reviewing TVs and people would ask me what to buy. And I'm going to be honest, there were times where I thought, well, one thing people would do is I tell them buy one of the Panasonic plasmas, and then they go, oh no, I don't want a plasma, and then they buy something completely different. So it was like, why did you ask? But that aside, if you're, for the average user, any name brand TV is going to make you happy. The important thing is that it's set up correctly and it's in an accurate mode.
Right.
It doesn't have to be fully calibrated. I mean, if you get fully calibrated, you know exactly what it's doing, but it has to be in a semi-accurate mode. This event, it really is a professional event for like that last couple of points of performance. I'm talking about the OLEDs, by the way. The LCDs are a kind of different. They've got better, but they're different. They're not in the same league.
Well, yeah, I think we can say like the C4s, or the C3s, like the LG, they're a great television set still. Like they're fantastic. When you have content that's moving, David, like it's very difficult to pick up on some of these things. But we are, we're looking at things that are paused and we're staring at it, and it gives us a chance. Like what scene just stays in that one spot without actually moving, right? Maybe if you're a colorist and you're using one of these panels, where you actually, your image is static, then that's where things, could be. It'd be a different scenario for them. But for
I would say,
making sure that things are calibrated, set up correctly, and away you go.
I would say with that point to no one's sitting watching a static image. That really is just so we can see the issue quicker in the time we have allotted at the event. It's gonna, if there's an issue with that you can tell in a static image with enough time, I'm pretty convinced a lot of people will see it in motion eventually. That's obviously obviously another motion artifacts as a whole different category.
I want to say one last thing. Sunday's event really showed what you're talking about, Mike. Right?
This is what I was gonna say. Was how that tied into Sunday.
Yeah.
So Saturday, of course, was the slow motion, pausing on particular frames, really investigating everything, because that's where each display is calibrated as well as it possibly can be, and you're judging direct to the monitor, and you want to see how it is in a more professional setting. You know, how close can it get to reference? Can it be used as a client viewing monitor, and all these different things as a tool? Whereas Sunday, because the boxes or the TVs were set to out of the box, by out of the box, they were in either filmmaker or professional mode with the light sensor disabled, eco off, but that's it.
They're not literally out of the box, and that can't
yeah.
be stressed enough.
But this is more, that was more of a subjective type test. So while there were some categories on the cards, those were more just for mental notes for the judges. Those were not actually graded.
Right.
The only thing that was graded was just for the judges to put in order 1, 2, 3, their favorite display out of the box, second and third. That's it. It was very casual. Everyone pretty much just sat back in the theater chairs. You had the large displays up on the wall, the reference monitors a little bit closer on stands, and it was a far different experience for the judging on Sunday. Much more akin to, like I described it to the judges as, you know, if one of these had to be out of the box in your living room, you know, that's how you want to rate them. And that's how things were done. So if you guys want to mention or talk about Sunday and how you felt, the one thing that did surprise me on Sunday, and it really shows how each person is going to value different parts of the picture than other things, especially when they're not calibrated. For me, is I'm more sensitive to the white point color skin tones than I am, say, luminance or something else. So for me, the Sony's being a different color of white, and then that tints everything. I would have put the A95L third, and then with the G4 and the S95D, they were pretty close to the reference color out of the box, but I felt the Samsung was the closest. So I would have put S95D first for out of the box. But on the actual cards, the A95L actually had a landslide win on Sunday, and then the LG was second and the Samsung third, which kind of surprised me. But also Sunday, we did have the curtains tied up so that some light was coming in, so maybe that reflective coating hurt it on Sunday.
Well, the other thing, I don't know. When I saw the sets on Sunday, I didn't even think about the Sony's alternate white point. I don't know why. I just wasn't thinking technically. I was just trying to do what you were saying. Sit back, relax, and, which picture did I enjoy the most without thinking about all the nitty gritty. So, I felt I liked the Sony better because I thought the Samsung, was slightly oversaturated. But again, we talked about this before. Everybody sees things slightly differently, right? Everybody has different eyes, and you calibrate almost every day, so you're going to see some more minute variances that other people who calibrate less or need a reference will see differently. So, what did you think, Mike, when you calibrate a lot, right? Did you pick up the Sony white point right away? Or
I didn't pick up on it right away. I can't really recall precisely. All I know is they all have their distinct white points on the box. I mean, they're all different. I mean, I think one thing that's important for everybody to remember about these filmmaker modes or their movie modes is that they're still not exactly at D65 all the way through. I mean, every manufacturer is out there to try to win a consumer over. So how Sony sets up their filmmaker or their professional mode, and how others set up their filmmaker mode, they have a bit of a bias one way or another in their white point that they think is probably going to sell it. And that's just sort of the way I see it. So, I mean, I think as you were saying that, a lot of them just setting it out of a vivid mode anyway into any of these modes is a win for every consumer. That's correct. Out of the bat, right? Like that's just one way to look at it.
That's 90% of the battle.
Yeah. And I think what we're talking about right here is, okay, well, as professional calibrators, which one's more pleasing to us? I mean, or as judges, which one's more pleasing to us? That's now just coming down to our own point of view at that moment
Well,
in
we
time.
should point out that
And if for anybody who wants to, get it accurate, then that's where calibration comes into play, and that's where we have to make sure that that our measuring tools are capable of getting to the right spot. But I think all three panels, they were very pleasing to look at, out of the box in their modes. It's more easy on the eyes. It's going to help out with longevity in the long run, and in the end, I think it's a win for consumers that these modes are even available on television sets.
And when you say all three, you mean the three OLEDs?
Sorry, all three OLEDs. And I would even say, because again, somehow our minds are always going to these OLED panels. Let's also throw the LCDs in the mix there.
Yeah,
too. Exactly.
that I think maybe played a part of it, because I think everyone there noticed the white point on the LCDs was way off compared to the OLEDs. Everything was tinted like a
bluish,
purple,
pinkish,
pink, whatever.
Yeah.
And so those two were just like, those probably just took away the thought of white even being wrong on the A95L at that point.
I think that's it. That's it. Exactly. The LCDs were not doing well. Not for the reason that you'd think. Like, obviously, the historic issue with LCD is the contrast performance. They were all face on, so that was mitigated.
And there was light in the room, so that helped them as well.
Light in the room, but yeah, like the color was wrong. Like it really made me reconsider my thoughts on. I for a while now I've thought like, okay, all these these displays from these top companies, if you put them in the most accurate mode, obviously you would never use it this way for critical work, but for an average consumer, the D65 preset, like warm or whatever the most accurate grayscale mode on these displays is, I was of the view like that's going to be close enough now that it's not going to seriously distort the artistic.
Measurably, those are really pretty close, like ballpark to D65. It's the metabolism on them is you need such a wild alternate white point for them to get them to look right.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, and to finish what I was saying before, like the director of photography of a movie would disagree with me, but I now disagree with what I previously said. The preset modes are not necessarily good enough. The OLED preset modes were very good. The ones in those LCDs, no, they're changing the perception, the content, like the Dr. Sleep clip where he's sitting at the bar. Oh, yeah. The BVMs and the OLEDs were showing this like rich green. It like you could almost smell the old house, right? And like outside shots, so again, that kind of greenish, that kind of Michael Bay action movie green I always associate with in the shadows. The LCDs were different. It was blue. It was changing the tone of the content. So I take back what I thought previously. You need to get your TV calibrated for sure.
and I think it's with the LCDs as well, as luminance changes across the screen and the grayscale does shift as well. So that's a bit of an issue with those panels. So it never kind of holds.
But isn't that also because of the local dimming, right? Didn't we start seeing as the local dimming started to act, to engage, that it started changing some of the colors and stuff?
The intensity of the LEDs when the panel shifts.
Yeah. So like if one takes a measurement using a 10% window with a black background and then switches it to 10% with an APL of say 18 or 25% or does it full field, you're going to get different readings for all of them, right? And it's good to average them out. But that's one of the reasons why I think we see a bit more wild west with LCDs out of their box modes versus an OLED.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into like one of the underlying issues with local dimming displays that a lot of people don't understand is, so let's say it's a, not a completely dark but fairly dark scene, and there happens to be lamps or candles or something on like one particular side. So now the local dimming has to change luminance for part of the image compared to the rest. And as the local dimming is changing the luminance and it's affecting essentially the grayscale color, the way that it's working, you're going to not be able to match the entire image to the reference nearly as well as with an OLED.
Yeah. I don't know if we want to talk about this, but some people were saying that, and I think Dwayne put this to bed, but some people were saying that because we are using the Sony reference monitor, that the Sony TVs had an advantage. And I think
I did read that.
People didn't. Well, a thing that people don't realize is that all the vendors, right, use the BVM to tune their sets. So it's not like Sony is the only they have their exclusive. So I thought, what do you think about that, Mike? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, it is true. I mean, if I look at all the larger studios that I do work for, and I'm not out west in California, but I know that it is by the pros out there. They're telling me the same thing. Is that everybody's putting these BVMs in. So the BVMs are the reference, and as David said, they're not perfect, but they're going to have their issues. But with the BVMs, if all of our content and artistic, all this art, this video art that we're making is done on the BVM, then that is our reference. And I'm not aware of any other reference at the same level that's being as widely used as the Sony BVM. So that's what we want to do. We want to match what the content is, on the consumer level. And then and we'll see where that tech changes us, down the road. So I guess it's no different to say like, hey, okay, our HD TV standard, HD TV, that was based on CRT tech a long time ago. So we're making all of our flat panels and OLEDs look like, CRT, if we really want to say that, right? Because that was our reference. Well, our reference right now is the BVM in terms of the overall hue and grayscale, et cetera. So which of these panels here are going to match that BVM? It's not an advantage by Sony by any means, because it doesn't mean that Sony can't get it wrong on their panels.
And also, it's not as if the Sony is working to some proprietary standard that they made up. Like
exactly.
Rec 2020, P3, D65 grayscale. These are ITU standards. So
that's right.
It's not. Is there some advantage to Sony having a broadcast division? I'm sure there is. I'm sure a lot of know-how will go back and forth, but it's not like it's not like these are things. These are standards that Sony have cooked up themselves.
You're right. Yeah.
And if they're using the BVM in Hollywood, that's what we're going to use. Like, there's no other solution to it. You need to see what they're seeing. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, that's why I brought up the point. Yeah, thanks.
I'll just make the final point again. I'm really honored to be a part of this event this year. I thought it was fantastic meeting everybody and adding my 2 cents to it. I think that everybody's going to learn from this. The manufacturers who were there, who were present, they learned a lot from this, and they'll see a lot of chatter online, I'm sure. And I guess the best thing for everybody to understand is that they're listening. They care. They care about the results. They want to be number one. And that's why they're showing up at this event. And the more we can relay to them to make their products better, then it is a win for all of us. And that's the important thing. So videocalibrations.ca is my website. You can reach me at mike@videocalibrations.ca. I am a video calibrator that services Ontario and Lower Quebec. So anywhere between Windsor, Sudbury, and the Greater Montreal area, you can reach me for work. I do work for both consumers. So if you got a TV set in the home hanging on a wall or on a stand or a little home theater, I take care of that. And then I do a lot of work though for the film industry between Montreal and Quebec and Toronto. So a lot of post-production facilities, whether you're a VFX artist, an editor, or mostly colorists are the ones that hire me the most. But I can take care of the displays, and I see a lot of work between professional displays and making sure that I match them as correctly as possible with the client monitors that are in the room. So that's my work.
Well, I just want to say I had a really good time. As you know, I've been doing these shootouts for many years now, and I'm glad we brought it back to the store. Last one we had at the store was 2018. And it's just a grassroots effort. And you meet a lot of really interesting people. You learn a lot of stuff. Even I learn stuff all the time. And so it was really a fun time, and glad to be involved with it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot more work to this than what is visible on the surface level. We've been having meetings essentially right after last year's ended. We were having quarterly meetings, which moved up to monthly meetings and then weekly meetings, and just a lot of work behind the scenes, put everything together. So
I have the spreadsheets to prove it.
Yeah.
It's obviously it's a tremendously important event with regard to keeping tabs on what the manufacturers are doing, and more than one engineer representative from each of these companies has said that it's really thanks to this event that these things are as good as they are. I know for a fact that one of the first years I was involved, and I'm sure it's the case nearly every year, but the engineers in Korea or Japan were staying up late at whatever time it was in their time zone. This is when it was broadcast live. We're staying up late, whatever time it was in their time zone, because they couldn't wait to see the result. And I know for a fact that specific products have been developed because of this event. So you can't, for maintaining or promoting accurate video at home, you can't understate the importance of it.
As far as, you know, it being broadcast before, you know, things have changed and, you know, recently, you know, strikes and so on in Hollywood and whatnot. So we do want to thank FOMO and Brian for what they were able to do. I know there's been a lot of disappointment that people can't see the displays, but in reality, it's not a disservice. So because it allows us to use whatever content is deemed best to judge the displays so without any restrictions. And then also, you know, when you have many different technologies on camera at the same time, we've seen it every year with the shootout in the comments. People say, oh, that one looks too green or that one looks whatever. And like the videos that you do get to see from this event, like you can see like tinting on one or the other. That's not there. That is an effect of the camera for different technologies.
It breaks my heart that anyone would try and judge the picture quality through a feed like that. It's like the comparison I've heard is it's like auditioning a speaker system by listening to it through the telephone. It's not far off. I mean, if you have a controlled environment, and I'm sure you've done it, Cecil, if you have a controlled environment and the camera is set up specifically to display and you're showing an issue, and back when I was reviewing TVs, yeah, if there was an issue, I would put a camera and tripod and zoom into the screen and show it. But for the level, given how good all these things are, like for the level of comparison that we're going down to, you're really not going to be able to tell much through a camera feed, right?
Right.
Correct. And it's, you know, for me, if I were to, you know, when I show comparisons, you know, I have to have multiple white points saved in the camera per display and then switch back and forth. And then like if I'm doing a video, then I can edit it so that it looks like it's done at once. But in reality, I got to shoot everything twice if it's two different technologies. And now imagine that at the shootout where there's, you know, 8 different displays, and you know at least 1, 2, 3, 4 different technologies. You know, you'd have to have equal cameras and lenses, and even then there's variance from one to the other. There's no way to do it, not fairly. And you know the images are constantly changing from light to dark, so the camera's dynamic range doesn't even come close to what the displays are capable of.
Right.
So it would literally be impossible to really show. So that's why it's best to just
and I think it's great. I think it's great for consumers to know is that I think we're in a very exciting era of television. I mean, if we take a look at the TVs that have been around even 10 years ago, I think it's safe to say that we've never had such accurate video available for home video reproduction. You know, like some of this stuff is, you know, it's like you would need a studio monitor, you know, years ago to make an image like this now, and it's just a wonderful way to bring in accurate video, and the manufacturers care to do that, and that's why these events are being done.
You know, the other thing we might want to address real quick is a lot of people were not complaining, but were commenting that we didn't test Dolby Vision, and that if we did, the A95L would have come in last or whatever. You know, because of the issues. And I just want to say one thing, you know, anytime there's bugs in a set, there's always a confidence level depending on the manufacturer that they'll be fixed. And given that, you have to assume at some point, based on history, that for each manufacturer, some of these issues will be fixed. But so you can't really ding the set for that. But with Dolby Vision, it just wasn't practical, right? See, so maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Because every year I think we tried this once. I think in 2019 we tried to use Dolby Vision and then use HDR10 on the Samsung, and it just didn't play right. But maybe you could just elaborate a little bit on the complexity of that.
I mean, and again, this event is not for general consumers trying to decide which TV to buy.
Right.
I mean, it does help as far as pure image quality judgment, but the main thing is professional side. You know, the monitor, the BVM doesn't even show Dolby Vision. It's going to be HDR10. So Dolby Vision in itself, really all it is just dynamic tone mapping. So it's just going to be how well does the display itself implement the Dolby Vision, and does it change anything? So with the G4, I can say for sure the Dolby Vision side of the G4 is a little better than the HDR10 in the way that it's implemented, the way they handle near black. But it definitely wouldn't have been enough to change the results. It would have been a few tenths better or whatever, maybe in certain situations. But, the A95L, Dolby Vision, needs some work. But again, the main issues with the A95L is both in HDR10 and Dolby Vision. So it wouldn't have made that much of a difference there. Then Samsung has HDR10 Plus. But again, it's just the dynamic metadata. That's all it's really doing. So there's not going to be any difference there. There's a lot of talk about it, but there's really no point to it.
Yeah.
And again, it would be so complicated because each display would need, you'd have to have one for the Samsung, the monitor, the Dolby Vision displays, multiple remotes, trying to sync everything up. And then at the end of the day, I'm sure David can really explain much better than I can the point of like how the Dolby Vision is worked on that side compared to HDR10, because as far as I'm aware, most of the work is done in HDR10 with different trim passes made for Dolby Vision, and it's issued that way.
The point of Dolby Vision from that perspective is, well, one reason a lot of content creators love it is it means you have a single deliverable, and instead of schlepping around a 1.5 terabyte UHD master in Rec 2020 HDR, and then another of the same, you're not 3 terabytes for SDR, then an HD version. You have the quote unquote best version, the most capable version, and then the Dolby Vision metadata describes how to. It's basically the tone curves for each scene and the metadata on how to downgrade any challenging shots to lower luminance or lower gamuts if the automatic algorithm doesn't get it right. It's all pre-recorded and transmitted with the content. So yeah, the benefit of it is that you can have a single deliverable. That's obviously good for the studio, and the colorists can decide if there's a scene with really bright flames and they're doing correctly on the 600 nit TV or the SDR TV monitor or whatever. The colorist can make some tweaks in the metadata and describe how that should be degraded to the lower capability display as gracefully as possible. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, as far as for what we were doing, the complications wouldn't be worth trying to overcome, essentially, to show that.
I would personally like to see how they're doing it, but it's another variable in an already complicated
It is.
event. And to your point, what do you do with Samsung who refuse to support Dolby Vision? I mean, I guess that would turn it into HDR10 versus Dolby Vision shootout, because there's not a lot of 10 plus content.
Yeah, it wouldn't have made too much difference. And as Cecil said, it's complicated. And when we tried it, one shootout, I think it was 2019, it just was not effective. So I just wanted to bring that up because a lot of people were asking about that.
Yeah, and the way that the switch works is it goes off the EDIT of one display.
Right.
So let's say Dolby Vision was to be fed, the ones that were getting Dolby Vision that can do it would show it, but then the ones that don't support it, it doesn't just change it to HDR10 and show what it would look like. It completely alters the way that it looks.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
It would be challenging to do, especially in any kind of time constraint.
John, I think you didn't get your full closure yet, but you are mostly retired, but still do some calibrations in Florida, the Orlando Villages area.
Yep.
So reach out to John if you're in that area. For me, everyone knows at this point that's watching this probably, I travel pretty much the right half of the U.S. And send me an email at classytechcalibrations@gmail.com for any calibration concerns or requests. And I think we're going to wrap up. And thanks everybody for coming. And it's good to have you here. And I'm sure we'll have future discussions. Not just about the shootout, but about other things in the near future. I'd love to have you all come back for various discussions. So
I look forward to it. Thank you for inviting today.
bye, everybody.